Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
The making of the final maxillary impression requires the utilization of a custom constructed acrylic resin impression tray. The tray that you see before you is one that we have made from a preliminary model, and we have determined the length of the buccal labial flanges on the preliminary model. We have created a relief space by using the 28 gauge pink blockout wax. At this point, we would like to go to the patient's mouth and to examine the flange length here to determine if it is indeed accurate. Just very, very carefully, you insert this, position it properly, and then begin to examine the relationship of the tray to the flanges. Now you'll notice here in the labial flange, bilaterally, and in the frenum, that we are a little bit short of the vestibular depth. Now this being the case, we would like to extend and to form the labial flanges bilaterally, both in length and in thickness, by the process of border molding. In order to do that, we will use dental compound. Now, the green stick dental compound passed through the flame and gently warmed can be used to make very, very small additions to the flange. We paint this on the flange in this particular fashion. I like to temper it at this particular point and then very carefully with my fingers form the flange so that it has the approximate form that we think it will take in the patient's mouth. After you have formed it with your fingers, if you then take the alcohol torch and just gently heat the compound, again tempering the compound in this water bath, which is approximately 130 to 135 degrees Fahrenheit, we can return to the patient. Very carefully, open please, insert the tray, position it up, holding the tray, grasp the lip, massage the lip down and forward. You might also pinch the lip up and just gently massage it from the exterior. This permits you to develop the appropriate length. Here you can see we've extended the labial flange both in length and in the appropriate thickness to form the vestibular depth. We'll continue with this around now to the buccal flange. Again, making small additions with the green stick compound. This is an area which is extremely important in its development. Again, placing the green stick compound, tempering it, and then forming it again with the fingers to the approximate form, flaming it with the torch gently, and tempering this again before going back to the patient. Open again, please. Again, massage the cheek back, down, forward. At this point, I like to ask the patient to close slightly and wiggle your jaw from side to side. Now, as he does that, the anterior border of the ramus of the mandible will come forward and form, open please, and form the distal extension to the buccal flange. If we look here, you can see how this section of the flange is flattened, and that is the form given to that section by the movement of the anterior border of the ramus of the mandible. Now we'll just continue around, perfecting the other side of our tray. We have completed now the border molding on both sides of the impression tray. And it is interesting to note that we have extended these to fill the sulcus step, as well as determined the medial lateral width of the flange. Now, often you will find that your preliminary tray is right to the exact length that you want, and this complete border molding all the way around the tray is not always necessary. The determination of the posterior length of the tray will require us recording in the compound the hammeter notches bilaterally and the two fovea palatini, because we will use those as anatomical landmarks to determine the proper anterior-posterior length of the tray. So at this time we will make some more compound additions across the posterior border here. Again, we will soften the compound and place some additions across the posterior border here. You want to paint this as a very thin application of compound, not huge, big, large gobs of compound. That's not necessary. Very thin application. And again, I think it's always easier if you take and temper that and then form it with your finger to give yourself a little bulk of compound across the posterior border. Again, heat it gently with the torch. Temper it and return to the patient. Open real wide, please. Seat the tray into the back part of the mouth. Again, ask the patient to close slightly and wiggle your jaw from side to side. That's fine. And very carefully remove the tray and inspect the posterior border. You can perhaps see here that we have picked up a notch, another notch, although the fovea are not very pronounced at this point. So we'd like to pick those up to make sure that we have contact with the tissue in the middle portion of the palate. So I'm going to make another small addition of compound to that area. Again, we'll temper the compound and form it with our fingers so that we have some height to the compound, because it was not in contact with the tissue as we would like it to have been. Again, tempering it and returning to the patient. Open. Gently inserting that in position. And after a few moments of time, removing it, and now carefully inspecting the area. And we do now have the two fovea, one located here and one located there. In fact, you can see the compound is still a little soft in that particular area. At this point, we are prepared now to remove the block-out wax, to round off slightly the edges of our border extensions in compound in preparation for the wash portion of the making of a final impression. We have removed the pink relief wax, and we have rounded the flanges in compound flanges. And at this point, we would like to paint on the tray the rubber base adhesive. We will be using rubber base as our wash material to make the impression, although there are a variety of materials that you might select to use based on the requirements of your patient. For Mr. Monahan here, we have decided to use the light-bodied rubber base material. Now we'll paint this adhesive around the tray completely, and also up onto the flanges as well, so that the rubber base, as it is polymerizing, will adhere to the tray. There we are. Now it's always smart to set the tray aside and let it dry a few moments before placing the impression material within the tray. And while that tray is drying, we can dispense our impression materials onto the mixing slab. As I indicated, we would be using the light-bodied rubber base, which comes in two parts, a base and the catalyst. And for the impression, a wash, we require about 2.5 to 3 inches of material. Now, when placing the catalyst on the mixing slab, you should always place it far enough removed from the base so that it does not run together and prematurely start the polymerization. All right, now while we have placed the material on the slab, we should return to our patient and ask our patient to, utilizing this gauze, to wipe the roof of his mouth as dry as possible. And I like to have the gauze wrapped around the two fingers and tell the patient to do this. And when I start to tell him to dry his mouth, begin to dry the roof of your mouth. Hey, Mr. Monahan, would you wrap those around your fingers? And when I tell you to, then you begin to thoroughly dry your mouth. One other precaution that we should take in the making of the impression, and that is that we should, prior to mixing, always inform the patient that we would like his head to be held in an upright position so that we can thoroughly control the impression material. Now, again, we'll take the main body of the catalyst, main section of the catalyst, and thoroughly mix that into the body portion, or the base portion of our impression material, spatulating it out over a 4 or 5 inch diameter area to thoroughly incorporate the catalyst into the base part of the impression material. Now you have a considerable amount of time to do this, so it's not necessary to rush it in the process. You also have a considerable amount of working time in placing the material within the tray. I think all too often we rush through this procedure and do not get a nice uniform mix of our impression material. Now that after that is mixed, we can take, I like to use this little tongue depressor here, a lollipop stick, up onto that stick, place it into the tray, and very carefully paint a uniform thickness throughout the tray. Now remember, this is a wash, therefore we don't need to greatly overfill this tray. Paint it up onto the peripheries as well, both sides. Till we have the appropriate amount of material within the tray. Now would you dry your mouth for me, Mr. Monahan? There we are. Now we return to our patient. You can remove that gauze. Open real wide, please. You seat the posterior part of the tray first. Bring it forward till the material oozes out. Release it. Hold it gently and ask the patient to tip his head forward. Usually you can use your arm to support the back of the head. At this point, you allow the material to polymerize. After waiting 10 minutes from the start of mix so that the light body rubber will polymerize, we can carefully remove the impression. Open, please. You just slip your finger up in the buccal flange, free it. It comes free. Again, remove it very carefully. Inspect the patient to make sure that all the loose particles have been removed, and then carefully inspect the impression. You notice we have a small tab here that run out the posterior. We can take our scissors and very carefully remove that segment because we would not need that in the master cast. Now, the only additional modification to this impression would be to develop the posterior palatal seal across the back part of the impression. Now, there are two types of posterior palatal seals, a mechanical and a functional. When you use light-bodied rubber base, the mechanical post dam is the method of choice in that the rubber is displaceable and will not allow the fluid wax that one positions back here to displace the tissue. Therefore, with this one, we will use the mechanical post dam. At this time, we can go to the laboratory to box this impression for pouring the maxillary master cast.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.